It's a long time coming. I mean, we've talked about women's rights, we've talked about the rights of girls for a long time, but still we see today the statistics, the numbers, they still translate to the same thing. Women and girls do not get the same rights. In this day and age, it is actually quite unnerving to see that people accept this status quo for women and girls, although ideally it shouldn't be that way.
After 9/11, after the 2002 in Afghanistan, there are improvement, even in some rural areas where the people has access to the media, to the radio and television. They know a little bit of rights, at least they do know that they have to go to school. But I would say still the majority of the girls in Afghanistan doesn't have a lot to say. Due to poverty, due to the cultural restriction, and due to imposing a lot of issues on girls and misusing of the religion by some power holder within the community and warlords.
The rights of women and girls should be a priority for national human rights institutions. I think for the very simple reason that women's rights are human rights. And that sounds quite obvious to us today, but even within the international human rights system, women's rights, rights of women and girls, have long been marginalised.
Many of the instruments that were prepared, their language, their perspective was very gender neutral. There was an unquestioned assumption that human rights for all, in reality, are human rights for all. But we know that from data, from daily experiences of women's and girls' lives, that is not the case.
Like anywhere in the developing world, women and children, especially girl children, are the most vulnerable sections in the society. And they have human rights problems of a different sort, of a different magnitude. The grave areas of concern for women, it is obviously number one, discrimination. Number two, it is the notion of agency of a woman. How do you control your own life, your decision making, whether it rests on you or it rests on someone else?
I think national human rights institutions have a very powerful role to play in terms of accountability.
States have the obligation to protect, respect and fulfill human rights, and national human rights institutions with their monitoring function, with their promotion function, can get state attention to redress and remedy violations not only at the hands of state actors but also non-state actors.
Globally, human rights commissions have made a commitment through what is called the Amman Declaration, which was a declaration made by over 70 national human rights institutions in Amman, Jordan, in which they committed to prioritise the human rights of women and girls, and they do so by focusing on issues that are specific to women and girls, such as violence against women, reproductive rights and other issues. The Asia Pacific Forum actually led the discussion and led the focus on women and girls' human rights at the international level.
The National Human Rights Commission is seriously concerned over this issue of violence against women and there is increase in crime against women. Violence against women is all forms of violence, sexual violence, physical violence and psychological violence.
We have a number of functions at the Human Rights Commission. One is very much around advocacy. The other things that we do is we recommend law reform, we go to government with good policies that we think will advance gender equality in Australia. And then finally we do a lot of research work, so we like to have an evidence base from which to speak. I mean, I think that's really important because it makes your advocacy much more powerful.
We have to remember that we're dealing with very deep-rooted, centuries-old patriarchal systems and structures. It's very, very hard to change mindsets.
In many countries, it's difficult to work on human rights of women. It challenges established interests. There are quite often cultural and religious traditions that are antagonistic towards empowerment of women in terms of human rights. So national institutions need to be careful They need to strategize and to be very clear about where they're going and how they're going to get there.
If I could be very frank, I don't think we can do the work that we're tasked with unless we are brave enough to break those norms. Because those norms are holding these women back. Those norms are subjugating these women, and those norms are beating them black and blue.
I do my work with passion. I really tell you, I'm doing my job because I believe, I have the conviction in women's human rights, in human rights generally. With all the frustrations that we find, we can overcome the difficulties and change the world to the better, to people to enjoy their rights.
We don't give up. I don't give up, and most of my colleagues don't give up.